with a single agenda item. Could I just remind colleagues that this meeting is being webcast, being recorded, and webcast will be available for downloading at a later date. And also to remind you to use the hands facility rather than the chat facility in the meeting. Apologies, Ruth.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have apologies from Sarah Compton-Bishop, from Philip McRae, from Gaynor Roger, and from Katrina Sinclair. And I'm also aware that Lorraine Cowie, Fiona Davies, and Tara French won't be able to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Ruth. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? If not, we can move to the third item on the agenda, which is the healing process reports and progress update. And before I invite Fiona to speak to these reports, just want to make an introductory statement. The episode and events that led to the commissioning in 2018 of the Sturrock report by the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport have proved costly and detrimental to NHS Highland financially and reputationally. But the cost to individual members of staff of the harm inflicted upon them by bullying and inappropriate behaviour is incalculable and has to be uppermost in our thoughts and actions. We must acknowledge the courage of the whistleblowers in bringing that suffering to public awareness and drawing attention to the deviant culture that permitted such rogue behaviour. We owe it to them to put in place the kind of steps and measures, policies and practices that have been identified by John Sturrock, by the root and cause analysis conducted in partnership with members of the whistleblowing group, and by the independent review panel which conducted the healing process. I would like to thank the group of union representatives, whistleblowers, HR staff and external advisors who co-designed the healing process, and to place on record the board's appreciation of the very professional and sensitive manner in which the independent review panel set about its grueling task. We are greatly indebted to Michael Fuller and his team for taking on such an intensive and highly charged mission, and for bringing a series of recommendations to the board over the course of 5 reports. We owe it to the whistleblowers and to all who suffered harm to take full cognizance of the findings of the independent review panel. The publication of the independent review panel final report draws the formal healing process to a close, but the hurt and distress occasioned by the bullying and inappropriate culture is still felt by many, and the healing will take time. That makes me personally, as chair, and my colleagues on the board all the more determined to press on with a programme of remedial actions which aims to establish a healthy and positive working environment and culture, and to eliminate the behaviours that have afflicted the organisation in the recent past. We remain wholly committed to that and would encourage anyone within the organisation who witnesses or becomes aware of inappropriate behaviour to use the channels that we have established, like the Guardian Service, to bring such concerns to the fore. I am encouraged that colleagues are already doing so, and that early resolution has been achieved in many of the cases raised. I would, in concluding these remarks, want to acknowledge the vital role that our external culture advisor, Emma Pickard, has played in helping the board to address the issues that have arisen and in formulating appropriate responses and programmes of action. We thank her most sincerely for her valuable and valued input, and wish her well in her future activities. And I shall now hand over to Fiona to introduce the papers.
Thank you, Chair. So first, I thought it'd be helpful just to set out what we've got within the pack for this session. So we have an overarching paper that sets out a summary around the take-up of the healing process, the high-level findings of the 4th Organisational Learnings Report, and a more detailed assessment of the findings of the 5th and final report. And it also sets out how we propose to continue to move forward with our culture transformation agenda. We've also got 4 appendices. We have the 4th Organisational Learning Report, and that follows on from reports 1 and 2, which came to the board in May last year, and the 3rd report in November 2021. And then, as agreed at the outset, the panel produced a 5th and final learnings report summarising their overall thoughts and reflections on the process, and that's included in Appendix 2. Appendix 3 sets out more detail on the progress that we've made against both the new recommendations from the 4th report, as well as a further update on the progress made with the reports and actions from reports 1 to 3. And then finally, Appendix 4 is an updated summary of the progress that we've made against the 35 main recommendations of the Sturrock Review, and that's a further update from those we presented in May 2021 and again in January 2022. I also wanted to set out some context and observations before we get the opportunity to discuss the contents of the report. So to remind ourselves, the healing process launched in May 2020 and was open for applications until the 31st of March 2021. And it was open to current and former colleagues of NHS Highland. And its purpose was to address the harm caused by bullying and inappropriate behaviour that some people experienced working for us in the period up to the 31st of December 2019. This was a unique and bespoke process. As Boyd has said, it was co-created with colleagues, trade unions, and some of those who had been harmed and were whistleblowers. And its purpose was to bring some healing through apologies, through psychological therapies, through the opportunity to have the independent review panel hear their accounts, through financial payment, and also for us to be able to take the learnings as an organisation. Initially, 340 people applied and 272 had their account heard by the panel, and those learnings from the panel form the basis of all of these reports. There is some data in the report in front of you today around participation levels and outcomes. It will be later this year before all the final costs of running the process are available and finalised and will be presented then. We sincerely thank every individual who participated in the process, who gave their account and who helped us to understand what went wrong for them so that we can try and ensure that this doesn't happen to others. We recognise the hurt and the trauma that their experience caused, and that also recounting their experience to the panel often meant reliving a difficult and traumatic time. We know for many that the process has brought some much needed closure in being heard and being listened to and in apologies being given. And we welcome that so many people took up the offer of psychological therapies, about which we've had positive feedback from many people. But it's also important to recognise that for some people there is lasting hurt and harm. We're sorry for this and we'll continue to learn from those experiences and work to do better going forward. As the Chair mentioned, in addition to our sincere gratitude to the participants, I'd also like to take time to recognise the substantial contribution of the independent review panel members. Michael, Francis, Neil, Ian and Tracy have been part of this process since it launched in summer 2020, holding several panels almost every week until March 2022, and have worked tirelessly to ensure everybody has been heard and listened to and the learnings captured. We cannot underestimate the impact that this will have had on them personally. We're truly grateful for the way they have approached this task and the support that they've given to those who attended the panel sessions, and many of the participants have fed that back to us. Thank you. I'd also just like to note the contributions of other people involved in setting up and running the healing process. Our HR advisor, Barbara Ann Nelson, who has been with us from the start, our staff side and whistleblower reps who were part of that co-production process. We've also had great support, as have the participants from SARA and the practitioners at CMP, who took the participants through that initial registration and one-to-ones. Our legal support has come from Shepherd and Wedderburn right throughout the process, and our practitioners from Validium have been delivering and continue to deliver the psychological therapies. And we appreciate all of their contributions in delivering this. Whenever we talk about the progress we're making with our culture transformation, it's important to note that the actions we set out and deliver against are key enablers. They create tools, support, and conditions for transformation, and those are things that we can track our delivery against. But they're not in themselves measures of our culture across the organisation, and so we continue to seek new and different ways to accurately monitor and measure our colleague experience and culture as we move into a new phase of the culture programme. Outcomes and data will become a key measure of our progress, and that will be as an integral part of our strategy and our annual delivery plan. And we hope to have some of this in place by our September report to the board, and then that those development of new measures will continue going forward. It is important to be able to clearly see what has progressed and what is delayed with any piece of work. But it's important that when we look at a red, amber, green status in these reports, delivery is not in itself an indication of our culture or of the experience of our 10,500 colleagues when they come to work. I've now been in my role for almost 3 years. There's always much more to be done, and at times we can forget to pause and reflect on what has changed. What differences do we see? What progress has been made? And so these reports do also give us a chance to do that, but whilst remaining firmly focused on how much more we want to achieve in the coming months and years. It's important to note that for the past 2 years or more now, we've also been working in the unprecedented conditions of a global pandemic, which has put untold pressure on our services, on our colleagues, and on our whole health and care system throughout this period, and that has impacted our progress. We have kept moving forward with culture through the last 2 years, even at times when we had to pause other pieces of work. But particularly from the end of last year, we have had to slow down some elements, as we've seen the biggest local impact on demand for services, challenges with availability of staffing, and those continue. Our colleagues are tired, resources are limited, and sometimes the demands and pressures can seem never ending. Our colleagues have all been amazing, and so continuing with our focus will be looking at improving mental and physical health and well-being, and that's a key to maintaining the resilience of our workforce. And we also know that incidents of poor behaviour or fractured relationships are more likely to occur or escalate when we feel pressured. So ensuring we reach all of our colleagues, wherever they are, whilst they support our patients, their colleagues and their communities, is critical going forwards. So we're prioritising actions linked to rolling out the principles of civility saves lives and the promoting professionalism peer reporting approach. We want to work on ensuring performance conversations happen for everyone, and we'll be developing our approach to inclusion in the very widest sense. These are the things that impact colleagues as they work with one another and with our patients, and they are how we will effect lasting change to our culture and to our colleague experience, as well as to the quality of care and services we deliver. It will take significant time and energy to put these in place, but this is essential as the next phase of our programme. You'll have had time to review and reflect on the organisation learning reports and on the progress summaries, and will have formed your own thoughts and questions. There are 49 recommendations across the 4 reports, and we've completed 24 of those, with another 22 in progress and on track, and 3 are in progress but have been delayed. And those delayed actions specifically relate to items of recruitment and induction. And that's one of the areas where we've been most impacted by the huge amount of additional recruitment that we've needed across the last 2 years and more, partly driven by the pandemic response and partly by our ageing workforce as many people reach retirement age. But we are also now moving these forwards. One of the big changes we've tried to effect as a senior leadership team and as a board in the last 2 years is to ensure that we are open to listening and learning, that we accept all views and experience as valid and real, and that we try not to take a defensive position when we're criticised or when perspectives different to our own are put forward. This isn't easy and it requires personal commitment as well as collective effort, but we are making progress. And in receiving these reports, we've very much tried to take this approach. At times, it has been necessary to correct any misinterpretations or to update on progress made which hasn't been reflected in the reports because of the timelines of the accounts heard. So where that's necessary, we've done that. We're also now over 3 years since the publication of the Sturrock report, and it's timely to update on progress with the key 35 recommendations made there. All these recommendations have been progressed, and many overlap with those of the organisational learning reports. And we have a plan to complete the remaining 10, with 25 already rolled out. We've much more work to do with colleagues to ensure everyone can fully experience the culture we're striving for where they work, but it is an important time to reflect on where we've come from. We've addressed some of the core findings of Sturrock in improving our leadership and governance. We've implemented our 24/7 independent Speak Up Guardian service. We've been able to roll out the whistleblowing standards and adopted early resolution and mediation. We've been able to design and roll out our management development programme, and we've worked on improving our partnership working. And through the healing process, we've tried to bring healing to those who were harmed. We've also delivered courageous conversation training to over 1,000 colleagues, and hopefully this will help them to address challenging topics and challenging situations well. We've improved our communications and more colleagues are hearing what is happening. We've added many more ways to listen to and learn from our colleagues, including our listening learning survey last summer, visits across the board area. We had a review in Argyll and Bute as well. And just last week, we kicked off another new event, our listening and learning panel sessions, where we've randomly selected colleagues and invited them to participate in talking to myself, our chair, our chief exec, and other colleagues in an ongoing dialogue about what it's like to work here. And that's so that we can hear different voices and views and engage on key topics. And we've also got some listening and learning live sessions coming up, which were launched last week with Inverness at the end of July, and further events in plan for Oban, Caithness and Fort William. We're also just concluding our most wide-reaching participation and engagement exercise with colleagues and our communities on our 5-year strategic plan, Together We Care. And that engagement and the need for a strategy were also key components of what Sturrock suggested we focus on. The purpose of me recapping on this is to highlight where we've come from on our journey of culture transformation. If we don't stop at times to reflect, we forget what came before and that we have started to make a difference. But as we continue to stress, there is so much more to do to reach our whole organisation and to impact on the experience of each one of our 10,500 colleagues across this vast geography. So we aren't complacent. This is only the end of the beginning and the start of our next phase. And that next phase is going to look and feel a bit different. Culture is a major aspect of our agenda, but we need to bring it into the mainstream. We needed the approach that we took in this first phase to do that listening and learning, to roll out those initiatives and processes, and to make meaningful improvements in leadership and governance and speaking up. Our focus on the years ahead will be on embedding performance and development conversations at all levels of the organisation, on the rollout of promoting professionalism and civility saves lives, focusing on inclusion and respecting and valuing difference, as well as ongoing work on mental and physical health and well-being. It's a huge amount of work and we need to do it well, and we need to set the pace of rollout based on the capacity of the organisation, not just to deliver initiatives with our resources that we have, but for our colleagues to be able to engage with them and benefit from them where they work. So we're now aligning this ongoing work as an integral part of the people elements of our Together We Care 5-year strategic plan. Under our 4 ambitions of grow well, listen well, nurture well and plan well, with 12 intentions linked to them. And each and every one of those 12 intentions is linked to transforming culture and colleague experience. This will be tracked through our annual delivery plan, and the measures we put in place and the progress we make will be tracked by a dedicated people and culture programme board. Integrating our culture work into the overall strategic and operational plans ensures we can make realistic choices and decisions about the sequencing and the pace of change that is achievable going forward, ensuring progress and outcomes are reported as a key part of our performance framework, not as something separate. We will, of course, still be bringing progress reports to the board, to Staff Governance Committee, to Partnership Forum and our leadership meetings, and we will ensure the momentum continues. But this isn't something separate, this is part of how we do business. So our next report will be to the September board, which is when we hope to have our revised approach in place. Before I hand back to the chair for questions and comments, I would just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who's been supporting our culture transformation over the last 3 years for all the effort and focus that they've given this, whatever their role. Our leadership team, our board, our staff side colleagues, all of the teams and work streams and individuals who've created and delivered parts of what we've achieved so far. For every manager and colleague who has invested time and effort in training or in telling us what you think, and all of those who role model our values in how they work every day. This is a massive team effort and it's really starting to make a difference. And to pick up on something that Boyd finished with, I would also like to add my personal thanks and appreciation to our culture advisor, Emma Pickard, who has been driving a lot of our progress on the culture agenda since she joined us in March 2020. She's provided expertise, insight, structure and support to the culture programme over that time, and we could not have achieved what we have today without her commitment, enthusiasm, energy and patience. She is leaving us in a better place than she found us, and I'm truly grateful we've been able to work with her on this. I wish Emma every success for the future as she takes up a new role outside the NHS after a well-deserved summer holiday. Thank you. I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. And as Fiona said, can now have discussion around the papers. And when you are making a contribution, could you please identify the paper to which you're referring, and a page reference would be useful as well if you can. So can I now invite colleagues to come in with comments or questions? First contribution is from Anne.
Thanks very much, Fiona. That was a very comprehensive introduction to this very important discussion that we're having. I've got a number of questions, comments, thoughts about how we measure the impact of all of these actions. Really around our listening and learning survey. I think the report indicated that we intend to repeat that on a regular basis, and of course it will be an important source of data on the impact of the actions and how our culture is changing. But I guess we all know that survey fatigue can set in, and also completion rates can drop off if people feel that they're not seeing changes as a result of surveys. So I just wondered what your thoughts were about when we would next undertake a listening and learning survey, and also how it will relate to the iMatter national survey, and how we'll ensure no crossovers between the two. I wondered if you knew how many of our teams had conversations following on from the last listening and learning survey and identified actions to complete as a result of those, and whether we have any ways of tracking progress against those actions. And finally, I was very interested to hear that we've managed to start our listening and learning panel. And one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking about that was, could this be an additional way in which other members of the board, particularly non-executive directors, could, I suppose, undertake virtual visits to the front line in terms of sitting in on some of the sessions? It struck me as a very useful opportunity for us to fill that really important role that we have of hearing directly from staff about how they're experiencing working in the organisation, which of course has been very difficult during COVID, but is always quite a challenge because of our geography. So sorry for the long list, but I know you can scribble furiously, so hopefully you've got the gist of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I'll give Fiona half a second to respond, to draw a breath and respond.
Thank you. No, and that's great, and I've hopefully I'll be able to read my writing as well as scribble fast. But yeah, I think around the surveys generally, obviously that is one core component of how we measure our progress. And as you say, we ran the listening and learning survey in summer last year, and we also have our national iMatter surveys. Now, obviously, we can control what we ask in our listening and learning survey and tailor it to Highland. With the iMatter survey, obviously, we work with a standard set of about 20 odd questions that are rolled out to boards everywhere. And actually, just in June, the timescale has been pushed out for our most recent update of iMatter. So we're expecting our board report on that in the next week. Once all the paper copies and late submissions have come in. And that's probably around the question of when next to run our listening and learning survey. I think that's something that we need to think carefully about. Obviously, we've just completed the iMatter survey. From memory, I believe that our iMatter surveys then going forward from 2023 onwards are moving forward to sort of March, April time to try and ensure that nationally we're surveying boards around about the same time, because until recently boards were sort of running surveys right across sort of 6 to 9 months of the year, which made it quite difficult to compare. So I think for us as a board, working out that landscape of when other questionnaires outside our control are going to come forward, and then picking a good point, I suppose, at which that we can go back out to people, but also that we feel that we've delivered some of the key things, or well towards delivering some of the key things that we would then be able to measure the progress on. So I think it's definitely one for us to reflect further upon. We have the tool at our disposal, and one of the things that, notwithstanding the full listening and learning survey that we're developing over the coming months, is the Culture Amp platform that we use to deliver those surveys is also able to be used for short, sharp pieces of information. So one of the things that we're rolling out in the next month or so are onboarding questionnaires, so checking in with colleagues at various points when they join us to find out their experience. And that's really a more proactive form of exit questionnaire, which will also be rolling out through the through the Culture Amp platform. And that's really about us, again, trying to gather more data about what is it about people's experience with us when they join us, and also when they choose to leave us, that we can learn from. And a lot of those discussions already happen at a local level, but what the platform allows us to do that is to do that in a more consistent way, but also in a way that people feel confident engaging with us on. So, but I do think looking at the data that we gather through the survey and finding the right point in time for that will be important. With what we did with the previous iMatter report and the listening and learning survey reports was we asked our teams to look at both of those sets of data for last year and to discuss them and to create action plans. There is an action planning tool within iMatter, I don't have the figure on me of how much that's used, but one of the challenges that we found was that the teams that are set up in iMatter are slightly different to the ones that are set up in the listening and learning survey, because the hierarchies for listening and learning came from our employee systems, whereas you can create your own sort of bespoke teams within the iMatter tool. But we know from discussions we've had with our leadership teams that each of the leadership teams set up actions that they were going to work on progress over the course of the year. And we also had some board level actions that we've been working on, and particularly around that visibility, understanding of how does the organisation work, and how do we make sure that communications is happening for everyone, not just at a broadcast organisational level, but actually each team has their own rhythm around that. And we'll be following back up on that as part of the next set of results. And just to come back onto the listening and learning panel, and we had an induction session for, I think about 9 colleagues joined us on Friday, and another 6 on Monday, and we're continuing to sort of engage with people on that. Would really encourage people who've had an invitation to participate in that to think about joining. The conversations that we had were really rich. People were a little bit apprehensive about coming on a Teams call with the chief exec and the chair and a director, and actually what we were able to sort of work through was that actually we're just normal people. We just really want to hear what those experiences people have are, and find ways to engage. Some people are confident speaking on the screen, some people prefer to have a reflect and send in their thoughts on email, some people like the chat function. But just from those 2 initial sessions, and we're planning many more as we kind of induct people into what the panel is about and really sort of launch it after the summer, the diversity of jobs and locations that we got, and therefore the diversity of experience just on those sort of 15 colleagues was really really key for us, because sometimes we hear voices, but we can sometimes hear the same voices, the people who are really willing to engage, who've got the opportunity to engage. And so for us, being able to reach a wider level of people, and to then use the panel to tell us what they think about a whole range of things, I think will also be hugely important in that listening.
Thank you, Fiona. Anne, did you want to come back on any of that? Okay. Further contributions, Graham.
Thank you, and again, thank you, Fiona, for that comprehensive introduction. I am conscious that there are still a whole lot of people, for a whole variety of reasons, that don't take part in any technology enabled interactions. And we can't, I think it would be dangerous to read too much into that. A lot of people just simply don't connect that way, aren't comfortable with it, not necessarily because they've got any concerns about the organisation, but it's a very real challenge for us in trying to understand what's happening across the organisation. And you referenced the vast geography, and when you add that to the complexity of an organisation that works in multiple ways and multiple locations, many aspects of it 24/7, it is hugely challenging. So I suppose my comment here is for us as a board, that while we should be happy that there is so much progress enabled by technology, we shouldn't get over comfortable with that, and we should remember the importance of really the first line supervisors across the organisation, who probably more than most will set the tone in their particular locations. I know there's a comprehensive staff development and staff training and development plan going on, and I think it's in that we have to really try and place much of our emphasis and resources in the coming years to avoid any repetition of what's happened in the past. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Fiona?
Yeah, and I think you make a really important point, Graham, because that visibility and being able to go and see people where they work, and that's not just for us as board members and executives, but the best way to find out how people feel and what they're thinking is to just go and wander around where they work and stop and have a chat. And you know, we've been doing much more of that in the listening and learning panel on Friday. You know, some of our colleagues were saying actually that's the sort of thing, not necessarily just in the executive team, but you know, kind of managers in their area, you know, kind of coming in and talking to them and finding out, because often if we don't create those opportunities to really see what great stuff goes on as well as maybe what doesn't, then we risk developing a bit of a kind of polarized view of our organisation where only the really good things or the really awful things come up to us. So I think it's a critical sort of message for us, to not just for us as individuals, but that does mean a lot, because actually when you go and take the time to spend an hour listening to people and finding out what they think, they do really appreciate it. But actually we need to get that message right through all the layers of the organisation, right through our leadership teams, that you know, data and information is really important to us, but actually there is no substitute for going out there and seeing what's happening and picking up on the good things and the things that might need a bit of support.
Thanks, Fiona. Alistair.
Yes, thank you, Boyd, and thank you, Fiona, and the team of many people that have been involved in this whole process throughout the period. As I see it, can be broken into the past, the present, and the future. And obviously, the past we know, and with Boyd Robertson's statement to open the meeting, there's a clear line on that. The present, we know where we are in terms of formulating and correcting and ensuring the healing process actually does come to a conclusion. But in all the work that you've carried out and in all the conversations that you've had and the listening that you've done, what do you envisage are the big challenges that are going to need to be addressed in the future, and the areas that perhaps will need extra focused attention to ensure that we actually get the outcome we all want to see? Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Fiona.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and I think it comes down to how every individual experiences work. So the relationships they have at a team level, how they're supported, you know, the importance of, you know, it's not about paperwork or processes, but the importance that every single person in this organisation has a conversation on a regular basis about how am I doing at delivering my job, what support do I need, you know, how well are things going, these sort of things. Where that isn't happening consistently, we see over and over again that is the root of some of the poor experiences people have of our organisation. I also strongly believe that it's now time for us to focus on inclusion in its broadest sense, and particularly about us valuing difference of different people, different thoughts, different values and behaviours, because again, that being comfortable with managing different ideas and relationships, and not getting ourselves into a place where we believe that there's, you know, it's very clear that something's right and something's wrong, or something's good and something's bad. That real tolerance of different ways of thinking and different ways of doing, through us kind of supporting people to be comfortable with that, and to sort of deliver against our values. I think that's another key aim. Probably the third piece is around that importance of the civility message about, you know, how we talk to one another, how we manage when things break down a little bit in our workplace. How do we get that back on track, you know, kind of using peer support? How do we make sure that doesn't impact on patient experience, but also that doesn't unnecessarily go into big formal processes and deepen conflict? And that real ability to kind of report what is sometimes described as disturbances in the force, you know, so there's little things that happen that are just minor incivilities, but actually if they're not well managed and addressed, and if people don't have their concerns heard and listened to, they escalate. So, you know, for me, they're quite quick things to say, but they require us to get right out across the organisation and to give everyone the tools and support to do that well, and to be able to kind of raise when it's not happening.
Thanks, Fiona. Jerry. 'Cause
Thank you, Boyd, and thank you to Fiona for a really very comprehensive overview of where we've got to date. I think it's following on from Alistair's point there, and I'm thinking about on page 28 of the pack, the clinical services in remote and rural areas, future service redesigns and onboarding new staff, and I'm particularly thinking in the context of our significant redesigns in Lochaber and Caithness. How are we incorporating the lessons that we have learned to date into those redesign processes to ensure that, as far as possible, this never happens again? And are we doing anything differently with the recruitment and the onboarding of staff into the National Treatment Centre, which is a very significant recruitment of staff, to alleviate as far as possible the issues which are picked up in the reports? So two or three issues in there, but it's probably that forward-looking piece to say, well, let's, as far as possible, see if we can prevent this from occurring again in our design and our onboarding. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry, and happy to pick them up. And I think it's sometimes we focus just on the colleague impacts around our culture and our history, but actually some of the challenges we had in the past were that we just didn't listen to what our communities and our colleagues were telling, our communities and our kind of patients were telling us about what their experiences, about what their needs are, and that's as much part of our culture as the experience that our colleagues also have. And so that's got to be, you know, it's at the heart of how we're working. Obviously, we talked about Together We Care, and that's been a great opportunity for us to not to create a strategy and then to show it to people and say, do you like it? Do you want to make any wording changes to it? But to really get out there on two separate occasions and really sort of listen. What have we missed? You know, kind of what actually is it that you want? You know, we think this is a great idea, but actually it doesn't matter if we think it's a great idea if it doesn't work for you and your community, or if it doesn't give the outcomes that you think we should be focusing on. And I think that approach is coming into our redesigns in Caithness and Lochaber. It's about that co-production, co-design, sort of really listening and engaging at all stages of the process. And if there's a reason why we can't do something, that we talk about it and we try and help people understand why we can't do it and what we could do and manage within those resources that we've got. So I think, and actually that whole approach, whether it's to colleagues, whether it's to service designs, whether it's to patients, is all about moving away from that perspective of that we've got all the answers and that we don't need to effectively listen and to pick up on things. And I think your points also around, you know, we've got real challenges in some of our remote and rural areas about finding sustainable service models, but what the focus we've had on culture has allowed us to do is to actually feel empowered to try and find different ways and to start again almost. So we're currently working with the community on call in a really different way about looking at, you know, previously we've tended to focus on what are the services that and the resourcing that you think you need, and when we can't fill that we end up in a bit of a stalemate. So it's actually about going back to the roots, bringing the people together, getting the data from public health about what the needs and outcomes are, and then working to create solutions for the community as well as for the colleagues. And you know, so I think that cultural shift has really helped us to do that. And I think finally around the National Treatment Centre recruitment, that's been a great opportunity for us to start trying out new things. Obviously, recruiting to the National Treatment Centre, these are people who are coming to work for NHS Highland. We're employing them, and we hope they're going to sort of come and work for us for a good chunk of their career. It's given us some ability to try different ways of marketing, different ways of attraction, different levels of support. And programmes like the NTC, but also our newly qualified recruitment, really helps us understand how we can get better at things like induction and onboarding. And so all of those lessons which we're starting to learn through this, we're also weaving into the recruitment that we're doing. We do still have challenges, you know, that are sort of outside our control sometimes around, you know, kind of housing and accommodation and the practicalities of moving to our area. But actually, the more we can do to support people with all the other elements of working for us and having a good experience and settling well into their roles, I think that's all positive.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Fiona. Pam.
Thanks, Boyd. A few things I probably want to say, and then I'll come back to the priorities. That a really good question in terms of what's going to be important moving forward. But probably I still want to pay a little bit of tribute to where we're at and how we've got here. And I think what we do have, whether it be through the learning reports, which have been really thorough and actually really coherent and consistent in letting us know what we need to be thinking about and therefore what we need to be responding to. So those alongside iMatter, alongside the listening and learning surveys, alongside speaking to people when you are out and about, and I've had the fortunate opportunity to do that quite a lot, we consistently get told fairly reliably what the challenges are for people and the very pressured system that everybody is working in, which is even more pressured than it ever was before. So if it was challenging pre-pandemic, it's much, much harder in today's world. And in these, so we have a lot of knowledge and we now know ourselves, and we know that we still have a long way to go because we haven't reliably got people having that positive experience that we want people to work for us to have. We have definitely got green shoots, and we have definitely got people telling us that they are feeling a change and seeing a change, but there are still people who don't feel like that. Also, through the healing process, whilst I had many emails thanking me for the apology, which nobody really needed to thank me for, the apology was for them and about them and for them first and foremost. But I've also had people who have not appreciated the apology, and in some cases felt that I was far off the mark. Now, that wasn't in many, but definitely in one or two, I've had people who didn't get everything they wanted from this process and didn't appreciate the content of my apology. And part of that, I think, might have been because I'm apologising on behalf of something that I wasn't part of, and therefore the authenticity of really understanding what it's like for somebody can be difficult to convey. But I was very privileged and very pleased to hear to be part of that. And whilst it was significant work, and often done by myself out with working hours because it needed that level of focus, I learned a lot from those people's experiences. And having been a long time in the NHS, I can honestly say that some of those experiences I would probably recognise, having been around the system a long time in other systems. So not just Highland, big organisations relying on majority of people who don't always get along, and some take it way too far. So that's just what I want the context to be. So I think we know a lot now about the organisation. And actually, we also know from the evidence base that happy teams that work together, that support each other, that feel supported and valued, deliver much better patient care, and that all of us want to come to work and feel in a good place most of the time. Although being human, that's not always the case. So I think we know each other a lot. We know very well what we're at. We've had a very structured programme and systematic approach to trying to get this to a robust place, and I think we have achieved that. And again, we will have people who won't agree with that, but I do believe that in the journey we've gone, we've achieved quite significant strides in trying to shape up and be in a stronger position, and I believe that's where we are. In terms of priorities for the organisation, we need to continue to build up that capability at all levels, because this is one of those situations where we're all part of the problem and we're all part of the solution, because it's a human-based issue. So I think our capability in terms of really supporting staff right through our organisation to continue to speak up, and those that may find themselves in a difficult situation where they indeed may be not have managed something well, or not had the capability to manage something well, we have a responsibility to them too, to ensure that they're adequately trained and supported in those spaces. It's not easy when you first go into a management and leadership post. and you have to deal with all the human factors around you that you do, but we have a duty to invest in much in management as we do in our clinical colleagues. So I think that building up that capability, continuing to do that through the programmes that we've developed, but also through our leadership and management structure, in terms of this is a huge priority for us on a daily basis. And as Fiona said, some of the feedback we've had in the recent panels and when I've been out and about is that staff don't always look for too much. A thank you, an acknowledgement and a regular check-in can be sufficient for many people. So those basic tasks that we take for granted. So building up that capability, keeping this at the forefront of everything that we do and responding appropriately when there is an issue as best we can. And sometimes issues are very complex, so they're not straightforward, but many aren't. And we can get early resolution, and being timely and responsive is the other priority that I think we need to really focus on. This is a massive deal for us. It's a massive deal in any health and social care setting. Good care will come from good relations, and patient safety is absolutely at the forefront when you have everybody in an open and transparent system able to speak up. And that's what we're after, and that's what we'll continue to pursue. But we have a lot of work to do. This is an absolute priority in every exec's objective. It's certainly moved down into the senior leadership teams of the different directorates and beyond, but we will have to keep going. This will actually never be done for us because it's a people business. We should always keep this at the forefront. But for me, our capability, our responsiveness, is going to be critical in this space, and I'm sure we can continue to build that up. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. That was helpful. Do you want to add anything to it, Fiona?
Couldn't find my mute button. No, I think I just to absolutely kind of agree with all of Pam's points. This is, you know, getting out there and really understanding how people experience our organisation and trying to make sure that that's consistent, that people are supported and listened to, and we understand what their experience is at the heart of success, I think, for us.
Thanks, Fiona. While I'm waiting for other contributions, just to ask you about certain aspects of the healing process reports, IRP reports, make mention of Scottish Government and the actions that are required to be put in place, for instance, for recruitment to remote areas, that there might be an incentive scheme introduced for remote areas, but that's something that would have to be discussed with Scottish Government. What is our mechanism for that, for raising these matters with Scottish Government?
Yeah, thanks, Boyd, and I think that's it's a good point. I think we've probably got a number of different channels, and we need to leverage all of those. So as part of our ongoing engagement with the Workforce Directorate and Scottish Government, I'll be sharing the reports and our feedback from them. So I think that will be important for us to pull that out as a specific kind of challenge that we need some support with. I think through the engagement that we have at kind of HR directors and also as chief execs and chairs, just continuing to keep this on the agenda. I think our challenges, we have some support in place around recruitment. You know, there's some support for international recruitment. There's some we've got some small schemes that allow us to sort of have some recruitment premiums in very specialist roles and areas, but that's because of the nature of our board and the size of the recruitment challenge. I think there is more support that we need. I think also our collaborative working, you know, across the region and across the sort of areas that we work in is going to be important as well, because actually our kind of colleagues in council, our colleagues in the third sector, you know, all have similar issues around this, and there are probably opportunities for us in coming together as well.
And there are specific recommendations in the fifth final panel report, page 14, for instance, about 360-degree review of managers. To what extent is that in place across other board areas, or is it in tune with Once for Scotland policies?
Again, I think there is some limited access to this, I think primarily at the chief executive level across the boards, and it's one of the areas that I'm part of the national leadership development kind of programme working group, and that's one of the things that we're trying to establish is a more coherent kind of collective sort of success profile and ways of measuring performance. But I think for us, as part of designing our performance framework, having a form of 360-degree feedback for leaders is key, and we're actually just completing the annual reviews for our executive and senior manager cohort, and as part of that we'll be looking at our sort of talent and succession planning, so we're really starting to embed those principles, but that ability to get 360 feedback or skip level feedback, etc., is something that is definitely part of our plans for the wider appraisal programme as we move forward. And having a Once for Scotland approach to a tool would be really helpful. So it's something we will explore.
Thanks, Fiona. Pam?
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that. So 360 is used throughout other boards as well, and I've used it quite a few times in the past, and as Fiona says, we do have plans to use it for the exec cohort. It's not used right through an organisation at this point, but it's definitely a good way to, we should always be seeking feedback in some forums, so we will continue to look at that. Nationally, there's been quite a significant piece of work done around a future framework for succession planning, talent spotting and management and leadership, and that framework has just really been tested with I think yourselves as well as chairs may have seen that earlier this week, and I think that framework speaks much more to the modern world than how things have been in the past. So it looks at the characteristics and challenges of the way things are now in a leadership and management setting, which require a sort of different set of skills from perhaps what we've traditionally relied upon, and that also has a really good focus in terms of the discussion that you might have with individuals in appraisal, and I think that will bring quite a significant assistance to all leaders and managers in framing how they consistently sit down with people in these roles and support them to be the best they can. And it speaks quite a lot to the risks of not being able to be agile and adaptive in nature, and has a number of, I suppose, tips and support as to how people can improve. So I think that will be a really welcome addition, and I think that will help us in some of the work that we're doing. So we'll be bringing that forward into the board as well.
Thanks, Pam. Any further contributions or questions for Fiona? Elspeth.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Fiona, for your contribution. And I'd just like to pick up on the part within the last hearing process, the May introduction, the role and expectations of trade unions and professional organisation and representatives. And I think it's really 5.4, and it's basically feeding on that output from participants who actually felt that staff side had been ineffective and had failure to pick up across the organisation, things that had actually gone wrong. And just to give the assurance to those on the call that actually Staffside are currently looking at this, and we're getting the support from the organisation, from executives and non-execs to actually take this forward. And we've actually got a planned conversation this Thursday to actually go into further detail on this and how we can actually move ourselves forward and support those people within the organisation that we absolutely want to support going forward. And if there's any issues with them raising concerns, that they don't remain silent. This is a new position for me. I've been enrolled since the 1st of October, and it's something that I take this seriously. So if there is anything out there that needs to be escalated, please do get in contact, and we'll ensure that you get the appropriate support going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Elspeth. And I know, Elspeth, you work closely with Fiona on various aspects and various strands of the programme. Fiona, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, and I think it is just to sort of recognise that really strong relationship that's at the heart of how we support our people, our colleagues in Staffside and in individual trade unions are a huge asset to us. People will tell them what is happening and concerns that they have, and that's really important for us to be able to understand and act on at an early stage. And I think over the last few years, we've really developed our understanding of how we work in partnership, about how it's about supporting individuals, but also how it's about working with all of that knowledge and experience that our collective Staffside have to help inform how we design things and how we bring them forward, not just about consultation at the end of the process. And it's a long journey, and for our kind of managers and our Staffside and our HR colleagues, you know, it's an ongoing journey, because some of this requires us to work very differently. But actually, I think it's a hugely important relationship for us, and to make sure that we've always got that test and challenge in a constructive and positive way.
Thanks, Fiona. One criticism that's made of us as an organisation in regard to our cultural programme and our response to the various reports is that we are ticking boxes, but that people aren't yet possibly seeing the change that they would expect to see. How do you respond to that, Fiona?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to address. And I think first and foremost, I suppose we would really want people to engage with us through all the different opportunities that we said, to say what is it that's not happening that you need to see happening. Talk to us, talk to your managers, give us that information. But we also know that however good our intentions are, you know, across our geography, across 10,500 people, we can't possibly get everything to everyone. We're working as hard as we can on it, but I think it's about that, people telling us what is it. We absolutely accept that quite often we won't get things to people, but please find a way to tell us what it is that you need us to do differently, that you need to have, that you're not currently getting, because that's how we can really act on that. And I think it's you know, we're absolutely open to listening to that and hearing that feedback, and in whatever way it gets to us. And we've talked a bit at the outset about all those different, you know, confidential channels as well that are available to people if they don't feel confident, you know, because a lot of this is, it's not about what I say or do, because actually, if, you know, for most of our people who come to work every day to do a job, their world at work is primarily about the job they do, the people they work with from 9 to 5 or whatever their shift pattern is, and the person that manages them and directs them on a daily basis. And our job as leaders is to try and make sure that the discussions we are having with our teams and the discussions those teams are having with their teams is filtering down through the organisation, and that we're allowing those experiences where it's not working to filter back up to us. So I think it's an honest challenge, but I'd really like people who feel that to try and engage with us and tell us what we can do differently.
Thanks, Fiona. Pam?
Yeah, I think what Fiona's speaking to, and I guess in terms of bullying or disrespectful relationships where people feel threatened or feel that they're starting to be harmed by the interactions that they're having when they're within their team or with their line manager or whoever it may be, because it can happen in all different forms. We would really encourage people to use the confidential routes if they really don't feel able to come forward openly in the first instance, so that there are routes in to raise things and to initiate that support. I think alongside this, though, that what is really difficult, and this is a national picture, where we are in the here and now, in such a pressured system where recruitment's very difficult right across the country, and even more so in remote and rural settings, that recruitment and retention piece, I'm sure for staff at times feels like we aren't doing enough, because that's the most common thing that will be raised with me. And that is a difficult one, because for every effort that we're making, we are not getting the return that you would hope. So I think that aspect of a practical thing, and if you're short-staffed, it generally doesn't feel good, and then that puts more pressure on, and relationships can break down. And we need to continue to look at how we resolve that, or how we can help teams prioritise their work in a way that makes it manageable for them. And that's an easy thing to say, but a very difficult thing to do in health and care. So where do you say no? And I think it's important to consider that context, where people may feel that they are just battling against it, and we know we have teams who are. And if you're a small team out in a rural area and you lose one member of staff, that's devastating. Or if you're a specialist team, that's devastating, and you're not easily replaced. So I think we've got that dynamic, which requires some, as we've said already, support nationally, and we've asked National Education Scotland to try and really support us in that rural space with something different that attracts people. We're looking at international recruitment, but if you are that member of staff in that team on that front line in some of our rural generals or out in some of our rural community teams in health and social care, you will be feeling it, and we know you're feeling it, and we don't have an easy fix for some of this as much as we try. So that's always going to be a difficulty. But where there is out and out poor relations, where people are bullying and people are mobbing or whatever they're doing within the different levels, that is unacceptable, regardless of how much pressure anybody is under. And we need to try and encourage people to use the routes, because we'd have a zero tolerance of that, and we need to find ways to recognise that. Well, that's the capability I was talking about, and to respond appropriately. And actually, we should notice everything and ignore nothing when we're going about our business, because you can pick up even on some of the kind of relational stuff when you're up, and we have got eyes and ears all over the place. They just need to be maybe looking for that. So I think there are two things going on there that we shouldn't confuse, because some of them are very much real system issues that are happening nationally, and our troops are struggling in that space, versus people being bullied and harmed through deliberate acts or poor interactions.
Thanks, Pam. Fiona made reference to the listening and learning panel, which has just been set up, and we've had 2 introductory meetings with 2 groups. One of the issues they raised was the one that has been already mentioned about visibility of the execs and of the non-execs throughout the whole area, and that's something that we have to look to develop, and mention ways of possibly doing that virtually, and hopefully now with COVID receding, I say hopefully, that it might be possible to have more in-person visits But one mechanism that we do have is the one of the whistleblowing champion, as well as the Guardian service that has been mentioned already. We do have a whistleblowing champion who does go on visits to areas and to particular hospitals and sites, health centres, to take the temperature of the organisation, and that is another route that can be used by people to raise concerns. When Bert Donald, our whistleblowing champion, visits an area, he tries to meet with individuals and groups of staff, and I would encourage you to avail yourselves of opportunities as they come along. Garrett.
Yeah, I'll just agree with you. It's amazing what information you can get and put over in just like a 10-minute toolbox session, just chatting to people. So if we could set up a way of getting, members to visit hospitals wherever we need to be to actually just liaise and just chat, you can find a lot of information.
Thanks, Garrett. Bert.
It's just to respond to your observations regarding my role as the whistleblowing champion, and of course you're quite correct in what you say in relation to the visits that have been undertaken, I guess now for about a year, and I have found these visits particularly useful, and I know that the many members of staff with whom I've had the opportunity to meet also have appreciated that, and it has allowed me, as you say, Chair, to get that temperature of the organisation and to feed that back in. And that is only one route, of course, to get that sense of the temperature and the culture that all of us in the organisation are wanting to tackle. I have followed the reports that have been presented to us over a period of time with close interest. And the fifth and final report, in my view, is an accurate reflection of where we have been and where we are. And of course, we must accept that. And Fiona has given us a very comprehensive summary of the work that is underway. What we must ensure, of course, is that that work continues, that this is not the end of an exercise, that this is a determination to deal with the issues that have been brought to our notice. I forget who it was earlier in the conversation made some reference to it being to it not being a tick box exercise, and I don't see any evidence of that. I see evidence on the contrary, in fact, of a willingness and a determination to deal with these issues. So hopefully these comments are useful in all that we've been discussing. Thank you.
Thanks, Bert, for these useful reflections on your own role and your own findings as you meet people in various parts of our widespread area. Joanne.
Thanks, Chair. Just in response to Fiona and Pam's comments about staff being aware of the routes to engagement and the tools that are in place, I just wondered, are we reaching everybody if people aren't as digitally enabled? What are the mechanisms that are in place to ensure that all staff know what the routes and tools are? Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Fiona, do you want to respond?
Yeah, happy to. And thanks, Jan. That's a really important point. And actually, it's one I kind of missed in picking up a little bit, I think, in a further comment that was made, because actually that's that's absolutely key to us. We've got the geographical, kind of diversity. We have colleagues who work out in the community, colleagues who work delivering care at home and in care home services who actually don't have time to access, email accounts, etc. So for us, there's a number of ways that we try and rely on that. Obviously, one of the best when it works is about that leadership cascade, about information being passed down through managers, and to Garrett's point, around that, those sort of team talks. It doesn't have to be, hour-long sessions, and that's a big focus for us, trying to assure ourselves as leaders that right down the layers of the organisation that we're responsible for, there's a mechanism for getting information out. But I think it's also important for us to look at, as you say, how we still use physical posters for things like the Guardian service, and we'll also be doing so for the Civility Saves Lives. And that's quite important in locations, like wards and care facilities where people are actually going about their business and can see that at a time where they need it. And I think we're also keen to explore the sort of opportunities of technology, but technology that is more personal technology. So as we launch the sort of development of our new website, which is externally facing, kind of actually to what extent can we use, rather than thinking about what we can't put on there, it's almost about thinking what we can't put on there, and why, if there's a reason for that, so that actually staff who may not have secure access into our intranet sites or into our emails, if there are bits of information that are helpful to them, they can navigate to them from their mobile phone, and some of the other Microsoft 365 tools that we're keen to explore, kind of like the sort of work social media, but again, that you can put on your own phone. So we're willing to try absolutely everything, but we do know the reality is that kind of it's sometimes getting out and about and speaking to people that gets those messages out. And for example, our Guardian service, now that the restrictions have been lifted, they spend quite a lot of time getting out to our more remote and rural kind of communities and settings, so that people can really sort of see them and kind of get a chance to understand what the service is. So, but it's an ongoing challenge for us.
Thanks, Fiona. Susan.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if I could just ask what, as non-exec members, our own self-assessment and our appraisal processes could take on board and reflect our own need to be able to demonstrate what we're doing against this important piece of work. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. And I think, Pam, it is part of certainly of the exec appraisal process. Do you want to come in on that, Pam, just now?
Yeah, we have got a couple of objectives that speak to this within the exec's appraisals, and actually this is also focusing quite strongly in our performance management now of areas. That's the whole staff piece. So we're really trying to keep the profile of it high. So again, in as Susan says, the kind of reflection of where execs are at and what else the contribution might be from yourself, and in terms of the fact that you can start to get out and about, or we can connect you in virtually. I think that would be really good to maybe consolidate that a bit.
And it is one of the areas covered in the non-executive appraisal as well, where non-execs are asked to enter a commentary on how they feel they are performing in that particular area. Fiona, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that is a good point for us to think about how we can weave that in, and I think also that just as we start to think about planning ahead for what we want to do over the coming months and even over the coming year, for things like kind of visits and involvement in things, I think that will really help our kind of non-executive colleagues. It also helps our frontline colleagues as well, because we know that for people working on shifts and rotas, sort of them being able to engage in things works much better if we give them a good amount of notice and we promote that really well. So I think that that approach will really help us to sort of be a bit more planful and so to engage more.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Susan. Anne?
So I'm just mindful, Fiona, obviously today's discussion is primarily about our employees, past and present. However, we do know that some of these issues also impacted on our wider NHS family. For example, some of our GP colleagues. I know that we have done a partner survey, and I just wondered if you could comment, because my recollection is that the results of that were really quite in line with the listening and learning survey. But I just wondered if you could say something about how you see our actions also improving any issues that there have been in our relationships with partners, and whether we might consider repeating that survey at the same time as the listening and learning survey to our employees. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And it's your recollection is right. In when we surveyed what we call our partner survey, which is all those people who deliver services on our behalf but aren't directly employed by us. So that includes most of our kind of GPs. It includes people who deliver, kind of care or care home services through a third party, and a whole range of other, kind of contractors and stakeholders. And it can be quite challenging to identify them, but and unfortunately we ran the survey over a 4-week period in late December and early January, when we had our biggest wave to date of COVID. So that did impact a little bit, but actually we got really good engagement, particularly from our GP partners, and that really told us a lot. The experience generally was broadly similar, but some of the key themes that came up that come back to the point we made around the approach to the website is that actually, as an organisation, we've tended to sort of think of people in their contractual relationships with us and use that as a basis for thinking, well, they're not our employees, so we shouldn't really be talking to them about this. And actually, our whole approach around engagement and involvement and communication is moving to the other direction, which is about going, unless there is a reason why it's not appropriate to communicate something because there isn't an employment contract, actually sharing information, working together, engaging on our priorities. That's how we really need to approach this, because it all comes down to delivering services, and actually to our communities and members of the public, it doesn't matter whether or not our employment contract is with NHS Highland or not. They are delivering NHS services, and that's an interesting distinction that the whistleblowing standards make, and it's one of the reasons why we've had the opportunity to really build on those relationships and to try and make connections, because actually any of those individuals has a right and an ability to raise a whistleblowing concern with us in relation to services they deliver. So we've really started to try and engage better on that front, make sure that they're aware of that. And I think that's also been possible through the engagement we've had through the Together We Care strategy. But I think it is, as you say, at the point that we have done some more work on that, we will want to go back out and test whether, some of the changes we make, for example, the launch of our website, hopefully at the end of the year, hopefully that will really help people being able to access information and share more widely.
Yeah. Any further questions or contributions? If not, I think I'll just draw this meeting to a conclusion. Before doing so, just to say that this has been an important milestone in our journey, cultural journey, and that we are great again. That we are grateful to the panel, the independent review panel, for the work they have done and for the pointers they have given us to areas that require further work. Culture is a matter that concerns each and every one of us within the organisation. It's a matter of personal responsibility, and although it resides in Fiona's Department of People and Culture, it is cross-cutting. It affects everyone in the system, and we must realise that it's not a matter of just one department leading on this. It's a matter for all of us, all departments of the organisation, to be involved in and active in addressing the recommendations that have been produced by the panel. The panel in 6.4 of their final report say that much work has already been done to improve the culture within NHS Highland, but more is required. I think that's a fair summary. You've heard from Fiona the much part of that. Much work has been undertaken to date. The panel has indicated ways in which more could be done, and it's our responsibility as an organisation now to respond to that and to take forward their recommendations. So I thank you all for your contributions today and for your attendance today. The next meeting of the board, which will be focused largely on our new 5-year strategy, and workforce and culture will be an important element of that strategy going forward. That meeting will be at the end of July, on the 26th of July. And I hope you all have a pleasant summer before the 26th of July, and that the weather improves a bit for us all to enable us to enjoy it. But thank you all for your attendance at this special meeting today.